The great John Smit, 2007 World Cup winning captain. Hello.
Hello, Jim. How are you?
I'm very good. Did you genuinely think, before the tournament started, that your South African team would be in the final yet again, in a position to win 4 World Cups and go back-to-back?
I knew they had built themselves up to being a team that could go back-to-back, but then you look at the pathway of what it would take for them to get there, and there's a lot. They had to play. It wasn't really an easy fixture. So I mean, you take it. Saturday is the 6th team in the top 6 that they've played, and they really have been incredible the last 2 weekends at an intensity level that's massive. But I did call them into the final, and I did it. I called the All Blacks as well, but purely just to irritate all the Northern Hemisphere guys. I didn't think that they actually would get there.
The last lap as well.
It is for us the ultimate final to play. We haven't played a final like this since '95.
The iconic '95.
Exactly, yes. And '95 was a pretty special day for South Africa, let alone the Springbok team. So, and we've seen how much the Springboks' effect on South Africa has escalated over the years. And I think purely just because the team's transformed as well. You know, we've came from a difficult period in pre-95 into now it's a team led for the first time by a black African Siya Kolisi, with our stars being of all shapes and sizes and colors and languages and cultures and religions. So it's a game that is followed by so many more now today in South Africa than it was back in '95.
Let's go back and talk about how difficult this run to the final, this road to the final has been for South Africa. Is this the hardest path any team has had to the final? Without
a doubt. And should they go the distance and win and be back-to-back winners, I don't think you could orchestrate a more difficult pathway. You've just touched on it, but that's sort of my worry about this weekend is, you know, can they get there 3 weekends in a row to that intensity, that kind of physicality? The All Blacks had an even easier runabout on the weekend, and an extra day of recovery. So those are the things that do worry me around South Africa. But every time, and I guess I'm always nervous because I'm an ex-player and of how much it means to us, but every time you doubt these guys, they just find something. They come up with something. Siya and that team is just a bit incredibly good at delivering when it counts most. So I'm biased, but it's very hard to write them off, no matter how difficult the situation is.
Just give people a sense of the emotional build-up to these games. Can you just explain what it means, like, to get to that emotional level and how difficult it is to do it week on week and what South Africa had to do?
So I reckon the only way to really make people understand is it's like the Hunger Games. We start off with 20 and it's life and death. And it's not like that. That is not the reality, but it is our reality as players, Jim. When you get into a World Cup, you start with 20 and you literally have to kill off everyone around you. And so the way you do that from an emotional point of view or a physical point of view differs, you know. But for South Africa, we are, I would guess, that brutally big physical opponent that's going to smash and thump every competitor in the Hunger Games until they go away. That's the only way we really get to the top. And now to reach that emotionally is every Saturday or every Friday or every Sunday, you've got to come up with that same mentality, that same emotional commitment to all the narratives that follow a Springbok all over the place. It's about how much it means not just to the team. Actually, the team becomes and the team's ambitions actually feature very little in a Springbok's motivation during a weekend. It's all about families and what they've sacrificed, people and what they don't have and what they go through back home, and then the hope of what that victory brings. And so there's quite a huge amount on your shoulders. I mean, people always ask me what was my emotional state when the whistle went in 2007. I was relieved. Honestly, I couldn't be happy. I mean, Alain Roland was the first guy there. I hugged him. It didn't look good. I hugged the referee. But I was unbelievably relieved that the weight of the world which it felt like at the time had come off my shoulders because we'd managed to pull it through.
Rugby is life in your country.
It is life, and I can tell you, it's a borderline cult, and I'll say it openly and proudly. I mean, our South African supporters are of the worst in the world. They're unbelievably brash winners and unbelievably miserable losers, but purely because the only way to explain it is if you've got some experience of South Africa, the most beautiful place to live. There's yet so much that's going wrong, and load shedding and lack of water and all crime and all sorts of things. So you deal with these challenges all the time. But on Saturday at 3 p.m. or 5 p.m., you get to open up a beer or a brandy and just enjoy what has been one of the best teams in the world for the last 5 years, hopefully beating another nation that has so much more than what we've got. And for 2 or 3 days after that, you float above all the mayhem.
Would you say the All Blacks are the best team to have ever played rugby? When you look at their record, 3 World Cups, I think I saw something, they'd won 20 championships, what was Tri-Nations.
Yeah.
The best team ever?
Absolutely. And I tell you why I say that with confidence is because Andy Ellis asked me around what makes this rivalry. And Victor actually answered the question. He said, it's because they're the one team that beat us more than anyone else. And that's what makes it count. If you take the last 20 years and you look at the world rankings, who's held number 1 position for the most? It's easily New Zealand as well.
Do you have that relationship after that respect?
I think that's the most beautiful thing about this rivalry is that we smash each other for 80 minutes. And they're the first team that'll come into the change room, take a beer, swap shirts, sit down, catch up, talk about your family, see what's happening. They really are incredible in every sense. And the easiest blokes to get on. You've interviewed hundreds of them and you've come across them, Jim. It's almost weird, and I think people probably see South Africans in a similar way, but you see a South African play a game of rugby and you think that he was built for violent crime. And then
Animals.
you meet him and he's got this smile and he's keen to buy you a beer and catch up and ask what's going on. And the All Blacks are exactly the same. They play this ice-cold, attacking, beautiful game of rugby that is ruthless. And yet the nicest guys that are soft-spoken, humble off the field. And I think that's where the respect comes, is that we really go hammer and tong for 80 minutes, but it's the way we treat each other afterwards that's a complete contrast to the 80 minutes of rugby, which I think makes the difference between this rivalry.
If you win at the weekend, does that shift from the All Blacks being the greatest team to South Africa being the greatest team? Just having that number 4 World Cup, having gone back-to-back like the All Blacks did in 2011, 2015, does that give you that mantle of
Like
the Springboks are the greatest?
another world title certainly doesn't make us have more weeks at number 1 over the last 20 years, but it does. Whoever takes that 4th title on the weekend does get to hold on to that mantle for a while. It is something special, certainly something the guys want to chase, and it will make a massive difference.
Sam Whitelock, he will go down as maybe the greatest. 3 World Cups. Imagine.
Yeah, that is some feat, because I think people don't understand what it's like to get to 50 tests, let alone 150 odd tests. And so
For the All Blacks as well. It's not as if it's...
Yeah, it's not
no
like he's up
disrespect.
against mediocre. I mean, there's a lovely clip, I think it was a Crusaders clip that he did, saying, I'm going to help you, to the new guys coming into the team, but I'm not going to give you my shirt easily. You know? And I think that's sort of what makes a great player. They mentor, they put their arm around youngsters, but they don't give up easy.
Outside looking in, how important is Rassie
Yeah.
to the Springbok team?
Look, I think he does have a different role, and I think director of rugby is something that didn't exist when he was the coach for the first World Cup cycle. And so now, and he was always a director of rugby who changed to a head coach for the last World Cup. I find it fascinating why there needs to be this complete understanding of who's in charge, and this sort of hierarchical, who's the biggest ego. I genuinely don't think Rassie and Jacques care who thinks who's in charge and who makes which calls, because I think the two of them balance each other out pretty well.
Do you think we've seen the greatest tournament we've ever seen.
Absolutely.
You do?
Yeah.
Just quick
That's
as that.
just-
Why?
It's just, I think the last one was the best one until this one. Purely because I think of the lopsided differences on the two sides and just how difficult the one side was and how many unbelievably big clashes you saw. So I do believe that the quality of the rugby has been better across the board. We've seen a team like Portugal come in here, snatching a late entry by beating the US, but actually delivering something pretty special. So across the board, I think the rugby's been better. So for me, without a doubt, our best Rugby World Cup, and it's a great sign for the game.
Would you say that Portugal is the greatest story to come out? A side story,
Yeah,
as it were.
Yeah, a wonderful story. To see them win and having created some relationships with them and what it means to them, I really think that this will motivate them to put in a little bit more to make this team a little bit more competitive for the next cycle.
Right, let's finish off. We'll look at the game.
South Africa, to give themselves a chance and make it more than 50, needs to find a way to come up. I mean, the motivation is not, I mean, as a captain in 2007, I didn't have to say much. You don't really have to motivate someone in a World Cup final. But it's around being able to get yourself up there mentally from an intensity point of view and how fast they can do that. Because I think what hurt them against England is that England played the game and the conditions perfectly, but got into the scoreboard early, and that rattled them. They weren't quite there in that first 20 minutes. First 20 minutes for South Africa will be of utmost importance on Saturday because they do not want to go in at halftime 10, 12 points behind an All Black team. And then I can tell you what else South Africa doesn't want them to do it either. They don't want to hold on for that last minute penalty kick. I think we're filling up the hospitals with cardiac arrest at the moment. But they have to find a way. And then the other thing we have to hope for is that physically they can maintain that for 80 minutes. You know, it's one thing to throw your body in there, and I think we've seen probably the best Eben Etzebeth over the last 7 weeks. You know, he's going to play a big role. I think Sia is going to play a big role in terms of his physical contribution as well. And so
They're the key players.
I get that feeling. I get that feeling because when the two of them go, the rest go.
I've almost felt throughout my career, Jim, you're on the bench, not quite good enough to start. You lads have completely flipped that.
They have made a massive difference. I think the cool thing about Rassie is that he keeps on switching things up. And you're right, when we got put on the bench, it was like, you've missed a few lineouts or you've missed a few tackles and, you know, it's sort of teaching you a lesson. Now, Rassie's coaching staff have turned the bench into the bomb squad, which is this cool thing. You're almost hoping to be selected from 16 down, you know, because you now are going to be the saving grace of the Springbok team on the weekend, which I think is genius. And it has come to fruition. Whether by design or by default, I have no idea, but it is a massive, massive positive for South Africa. We rely heavily on that bench. And you talk about Kwagga. I mean, the other guy that's made an unbelievable difference is Dion Fourie. 38 years old.
How old is he?
38. Yeah.
Not that he doesn't look 38, but 38 and the power that he's still got.
And there can't be a more destructive scrummager in the world at the moment than Oxenchair. Yeah. I mean, 4 years ago, we had the Beast tearing it up. So we got rid of the Beast and we got an Ox.
Confident?
Nah, never overly confident against the All Blacks. Always hopeful.
Hopeful.
Optimistically hopeful.
Okay. What does it do to your country if they go back to back? Does it change much, or does it just cement and really nail in the foundations that the Springboks are the greatest team right now?
I think the reality is it won't change any of the things that make life challenging back home, but it'll make life a hell of a lot more bearable. And the other thing that rugby does is it galvanizes us. We have to be one of the most diverse countries in the world with so many differences across the board. And as a young democracy, there's only been one thing since we became a democracy in '94 that has been able to galvanize us, bring us together, give us hope, drink beer together, shout and scream at televisions with gay abandon, and that's the Springboks. It is the one thing that's continued to bring help. I can't think of anything else that has done as much to unite a country than the Springboks. And we've been going a long time, since 1994. So there's a huge responsibility on them. And they know that as well. And I think you've also seen the narrative. They work that narrative. they remind themselves of it all the time, and so they're not playing for themselves. They're playing for something much bigger.
The great, the powerful John Smit.
Not so sure about powerful.